But let's turn now to Washington, D.C. and our Sky News US correspondent, Annelise Nielsen. Annelise, thank you so much for your time. President Biden has announced another swathe of sanctions upon Russia, targeting their banking and financial institutions. They're an improvement on what was first laid down, aren't they?
Oh, that's quite right, Chris, but what was first laid down wasn't much at all. And so this was the big guns that we kept waiting for to find out what the Biden administration was going to do. But what's quite interesting in all this is just how coordinated they have been. And this was one of the promises of the Biden administration, that they were going to work more with their allies. We haven't seen much of a pushback in terms of actual action against Russia about this invasion, but this is quite severe what they've laid down, especially in conjunction with the United Kingdom. So basically, they're just locking Russia out of any financial institution, and that's for not just big companies, they're targeting oligarchs as well. And it's going to make it a lot more difficult for money to get in and out of Russia. So this is quite a critical moment, but there's still a lot more they could do. There's no personal sanctions against Vladimir Putin. And what we also saw was that they wouldn't agree on locking Russia out of the SWIFT payment system. Now, this is something most people wouldn't come into contact with unless you're sending large amounts of money around the world, but it's a function used by 11,000 different financial institutions. And so when you do send the money, you get a SWIFT code. That's how they authorize and keep track of transactions. And so they could have locked Russia out of that. But it seems like it was the rest of Europe not siding with the US and UK on pushing for that particular measure.
The sanctions that we proposed on all their banks have of equal consequence, maybe more consequence than SWIFT, number one. Number two, it is always an option, but right now that's not the position that the rest of Europe wishes to take.
So this is rather curious, Annelise. They could have gone the extra step. From what I have read and heard, it could be Germany standing in the way of taking sanctions to that nth degree.
And it does seem like that would logically make sense. One of the things that's going to be an issue is other countries being locked out of that SWIFT payment system, and you've got to look at where this money is flowing both ways. At the same time, they're increasingly under pressure about their power, and the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was supposed to be a critical piece of infrastructure between those two countries. Now they've had to say that they're not going ahead with the licensing of that. It's all functional, ready to go, but simply hasn't been switched on because they couldn't get the final approvals, with that hanging in the balance, and now that's off.
So, Annelise, what's the mood like in Washington, D.C.? For so long, US politics has been so toxic, so divided, but are we seeing the first united Democrat-Republican front to this crisis?
No, if anything, I think we're dividing off more into little teams among the big teams. And so I think we're getting much more shades of blue and red. I think one of the interesting divisions this does highlight, though, in DC is the fact that you do have this America First element. And that actually really solidifies both the left of the Democrats and also the really right wing of the Republican Party. And that's because the left of the Democrats especially say we want only American made, we want everything to revolve around America, and that's often union driven because they want jobs in America. And that's the same with the right faction of the Republicans. They don't want that globalist outlook. They want everything focused on the US. So those two factions aren't that worked up about Ukraine. It's more the centrists in DC that are saying, this is really bad on the global stage. We haven't handled this as well as we could have. We haven't been quick off the mark like we could have. But they are happy that they're reinforcing NATO. This has been a real return to a NATO-focused American outlook.